The story begins with Clara, who recently discovered that some plants on the edge of the desert are drying up. These plants can be used as a narcotic, which is why she ventures into the desert to collect samples. Meanwhile, we see a mysterious man digging up a body in the same area. He calls an unknown contact, saying his work is done and that they need a new pilot. The full story behind this will be revealed later. The next day, Clara heads out again to collect more plant samples. By this time, she has traveled quite far but still hasn't found any samples. Then, we meet a girl named Ellie, who's riding a bike. Ellie is the daughter of the local sheriff. Seeing Clara in the deserted ravine, Ellie is surprised and wonders what Clara is doing out there. Clara explains that she's there for research. Ellie then explains that she came out to avoid her father discovering she skipped school. The two quickly form a bond and begin looking for the plants together. While they rest, Ellie tells Clara about her life. Her mother has passed away, and she lives alone with her father, who rarely has free time. That's why she enjoys riding out here. After some time, Ellie leaves, but Clara stays behind to search further. Night falls, and Clara suddenly sees a plane falling from the sky and crashing. Shocked, she rushes to the crash site. The plane is completely destroyed, but the pilot, Thomas, is still alive. Clara also notices some packets of gear scattered nearby. Initially, she considers helping Thomas, but quickly realizes he's likely a smuggler. She decides it's best to leave and gets into her car. Before she can escape, Thomas starts shooting at her, causing her car to get stuck. Now under Thomas's control, Clara is at his mercy. Trying to stay calm, Clara speaks up, asking if he even knows where he is. When he admits he doesn't, Clara offers to guide him, claiming she knows the way to his destination, although this is a lie to save herself. Thomas agrees, forcing her to load the packets into the car and locking her hands. Before getting into the car, Clara secretly hides her map to prevent Thomas from knowing the exact way. There's a knife in her car, which she's about to hide, but before she can, Thomas enters, and they both set off. Meanwhile, the same unknown man, the supplier, named George, calls, wondering why the plane hasn't arrived. He learns Thomas left long ago and decides to go after him to retrieve his parcel. During the drive, Clara nervously asks Thomas if he will release her once they reach the city. Thomas doesn't reply, which increases her fear. She promises she won't tell anyone, but Thomas remains silent, focused on something else, making Clara even more nervous. During this tense silence, they get into an accident, meaning they'll have to continue on foot. Thomas tells Clara to fill a foreign bag with the packets, insisting they keep moving. Clara tries to reason with him, pointing out that it will take days to cross the desert on foot, especially since he's injured. Thomas ignores her and pushes forward, but before they leave, Clara discreetly grabs the knife, hiding it in her sock for safety. On the other side of the desert, George parks his truck and roams around, hoping to locate the crashed plane and his lost package. Meanwhile, Clara and Thomas walk through the desert all night, their condition worsening. Thomas keeps pushing Clara to move faster, saying they need to reach their destination quickly. Exhausted, Clara finally asks if they can stop and rest for a while, as her strength is failing. Thomas goes to relieve himself, and Clara takes advantage of the moment to attempt an escape. But her plan backfires. Rather than saving herself, she only infuriates Thomas further. He retaliates by restraining her even more tightly, tying her hands and forcing her to carry a heavy bag on her back. Meanwhile, we see Sheriff Alex, Ellie's father, who learns from the news that a half-eaten body has been found in the desert, likely uncovered by animals. While investigating, he crosses paths with Ellie, who's supposed to be on her way to school but is not wearing a helmet. He scolds her, but she barely responds, highlighting their distant relationship. Just then, Alex receives a call from Clara's hostel, informing him that she hasn't returned in 2 days. Hearing this, Ellie interjects, saying she met Clara recently and insists they find her quickly, calling Clara a very nice girl. Alex and Ellie go to Clara's hostel, but she's not there, raising concerns for her safety. Alex sends Ellie to school, as he doesn't want her in such a dangerous area. Elsewhere, George, the supplier, finally arrives at the crashed plane. He finds the packets and some bullet casings, confirming that something serious happened here and that Thomas is likely still alive. Determined, George follows the tracks from the crash and eventually stumbles upon a car with all 4 doors open, accompanied by 2 other men nearby. George lies, asking if they've seen anyone else. The men mention calling the police, which George dislikes, So he kills them and drives off, his only objective to retrieve the valuable packets by any means. Meanwhile, Thomas is struggling. His injured leg has become infected, making it difficult for him to walk. Clara suggests they stop to rest, but Thomas is too afraid of George, knowing he'll be on their trail. Clara explains that if they keep walking under the brutal sun, his infection and exhaustion will only worsen, making survival impossible. Convinced by her logic, Thomas reluctantly agrees, and they find shelter in some shade. Clara seizes the chance to ask how his plane crashed. Thomas explains that the plane was old, with an engine that stopped mid-flight, and that he flies low to avoid detection by radar. The scene cuts to Alex, who has now located Clara's abandoned car. Near it, he discovers the bodies of the 2 men George killed, confirming that something significant is going on. As he heads back to the station, he notices tire marks likely left by George's car and begins following them. Alex eventually finds George's car parked near a hill and starts inspecting it. Suddenly, George ambushes Alex, opening fire on him. In the scuffle, Alex's name tag falls to the ground, and he slips and tumbles down a ravine. George assumes Alex is dead and, to ensure he cannot communicate or get help, he destroys Alex's radio and sabotages his truck. Clara and Thomas have been trudging along for hours, finally arriving at the foot of a mountain. Thomas insists they need to climb over it to reach the other side as soon as possible, but Clara, exhausted, suggests they rest for the night and tackle it in the morning. Pressed for time and in worsening condition, Thomas frees her hands momentarily to allow her to help him. Though Thomas's life hangs by a thread, Clara chooses to help him, and together they make it to the mountain summit by dawn. Meanwhile, Ellie becomes increasingly worried when her father doesn't return after his shift. She heads to the police station, finding it empty as everyone has gone home. Suspecting her father has gone after Clara and sensing something has gone wrong, she grabs her bike and sets off to search for him herself. As darkness falls where Clara and Thomas are resting, they realize they're both alone in the desert with no food or water. Despite their days spent together, they realize they don't even know each other's names. During their conversation, Thomas reveals that he is actually a teacher but had to turn to illegal work to afford his father's medical treatment. He explains that sometimes people are forced to make difficult choices. In response, Clara shows him a butterfly tattoo on her hand, sharing that she got it in memory of her younger sister, who passed away last year. Clara confesses that many people blame her for her sister's death due to past mistakes she made, which led her to leave home and wander in the desert. This scene serves as a reminder not to judge a book by its cover, as both Thomas and Clara are good-hearted but brought together by unfortunate circumstances. Meanwhile, Ellie is frantically searching for her father, Alex. As night falls, she grows frightened but soon finds his name tag on the ground. Standing at the spot, she shouts for him, and luckily, Alex hears her voice. They reunite, and with Ellie's help, he climbs out of the ditch. Alex tells Ellie to go home, explaining that he needs to handle this on his own. Ellie, however, doesn't listen. Without telling him, she sneaks away to continue searching for Clara. Back in the desert, Clara cuts her ropes with a hidden knife and seizes the opportunity to run away while Thomas is asleep. She runs as far as she can, trying to escape before anyone can follow her. However, she soon encounters George, who immediately grows suspicious. Though he doesn't recognize her, he assumes her presence must be connected to the missing packets. Clara begins to flee between the high rocks, and George gives chase. At that moment, Thomas appears and sees her running. He steps in front of George to protect her, telling her to escape. Thomas tries to reason with George, offering the packets and pleading for his life, explaining that his family is waiting for him. But George, unmoved, shoots Thomas and takes the bags. Clara has a chance to escape, but notices Ellie's bike nearby, realizing she must be inside the area and in danger. Determined, Clara goes back to rescue her. Inside, she finds George holding Ellie captive. Clara tries to free her, but George fires a shot, hitting Clara in the stomach, and she collapses. In the confusion, Ellie pushes George, causing him to hit his head on a rock. She quickly pulls Clara onto her bike and speeds away, with George in a furious pursuit. Alex arrives and starts shooting at George, but George, undeterred, continues his chase. Ellie accelerates, but Clara loses her balance and falls off the bike. George seizes the opportunity, dousing Ellie in kerosene, intending to set her ablaze. Meanwhile, Clara notices the bags nearby, sets them on fire, and shouts to George. Seeing his precious packets burning, George loses control. Overcome by greed, he leaps into the flames to retrieve them and is consumed by the fire. With George gone, Alex arrives and, relieved to find Ellie safe, quickly pulls her away. Clara, though injured, is also alive. Clara spots the plant she had originally come for, completing her mission. The story concludes with a sense of closure, as Clara, Ellie, and Alex all escape the desert with a renewed sense of purpose. So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more videos.